السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So alhamdulillah, today is the 92nd part of our series, Seerah Khatam al-Nabeen sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we were talking about the happenings after the Ghazwa Bani Mustaliq or Muraysiya. That's another name for that same expedition or Ghazwa of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, just a quick review of what we talked about last session. We started the discussion on the Hadithatul Ifk, the slander, the Ifk, which is a slander or lie against our mother Aisha radhiallahu anha. And we talked about how this was one of the hardest tests on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because it had to do with his household and was to do with the honor of his household and of his wives. We know that the Prophet ﷺ told us in the hadith that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a person, He tests them. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ tells in another hadith that Ashaddul Bala al-Anbiya, that the ones who are tested the most are the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. So the Prophet ﷺ was again tested, test after test, and he passed all his tests. Just like Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran, that he passed all the tests. And Rasulullah ﷺ, this was another test that was given, and it was to do with the honor of his household. Now, we started on the hadith of Aisha radhiallahu anha, where she beautifully and eloquently explains the hadith. It's a very long hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, other books of hadith, talking about this episode and what happened. And just a quick review, so she was saying that the Prophet ﷺ would draw lots to see which of his wives would join him on a journey. So when he would take a journey, when he would go for a journey, he would, to be fair to all the wives, he would randomly pick and draw lots to see who would go with him. And in this journey, it's reported that Aisha radhiallahu anha, she says that my name came out, or my lot came out, and she was the one who was taken along with the Prophet ﷺ in this journey. Now, Aisha radhiallahu anha, she says that while they were stationed, and I talked about how why the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were hurrying to leave and to move when they were coming back on the return journey. And Aisha radhiallahu anha, she says that when it was announced that we will move on, that we're going to be marching, she went to use the bathroom. Just like, for example, when we're stopped somewhere, so just before you're leaving, you're like, what, let me go use the bathroom, just in case, so I can, so we don't have to stop, shortly. So let me go use the bathroom before we leave. So she went to use the bathroom, and she says that while she was coming back, she lost a necklace. And it's mentioned that it was a Kharaj al-Yamani. It was a necklace that was from Yemen, and it had like the tasbih that we have now with the pearls or type round like that. It was type of like that. And she lost this, and she says that when I was coming back, I touched my neck and found that the necklace was not there. So I went back to look for it. Now it took a long that while I was looking for it, it took me a long time to find it. And once she did eventually find it, when she came back, the army had departed. Everyone had left. There was not one person left from the army. Now she says regarding this, and this shows also look at how she doesn't blame those people, the Sahaba that were carrying the Hawdaj. And I explain what Hawdaj is. Hawdaj is the carriage that the women would travel on. So they would sit inside this carriage, and that carriage would be lifted and attached to the camel, and then she would go on and she would travel like that. So the women of that time would travel in this Hawdaj. So she says, like udhran, she's forgiving them and basically giving them excuses that they didn't feel that I was inside it. They didn't know if I was inside or not, because she was light. And she says, وَكَانَ النِّسَاءِ إِذْ خِفَافًا, that the women of that time, they would be very light. And one of the reasons behind this, I mentioned this, is that they would not have food to eat. The Sahaba would go hungry days on end. Aisha radhiallahu anha mentions in one hadith, 2 moons would pass, and we would not light the stove. So we didn't have anything to even cook. So they would be surviving on the aswadain, the two black things, the aswadan, which is the dates and water. So they would be, doing this, eating this very lightly. So she says, وَكَانَ النِّسَاء إِذْ ذَاكَ خِفَافًا. The women of that time would be very light. لَمْ يَثْقُلْنَ. They did not get heavy. وَلَمْ يَغْشَهُنَّ اللَّحْمُ. And they weren't covered with lahm. They didn't have a lot of meat on their body, so they were very light. And again, going back, it was because of the hunger and the starvation that they were going through for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, she says, وَإِنَّمَا يَأْكُلْنَ الْعُلْقَ مِنَ الطَّعَامِ. So they would eat very little, whatever is necessary just to keep you alive, just to keep yourself alive. That's basically what they would eat at that time. And then she says, فَلَمْ يَسْتَنْكِرِ الْقَوْمِ حِينَ رَفَعُوهُ ثِقَلَ الْهَوْدَجِ. So she's making excuse for the men who picked up the hawdaj, that they weren't able to ascertain as if she's inside or not. So they thought, she was inside. They picked her up and they put her in the hawdaj, but without her in it, obviously, onto the camel. And they marched on. Now, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that when she came back, they were all gone, so she found no one there. So she thought, let me just sit down in this place instead of moving around looking for them or trying to go after them on foot, which is very dangerous because she has no water, she has nothing with her, no food or anything like that. So it's better just to stay where I am, and they'll eventually find out that I'm missing, and they'll come back to get me. So she says that I sat there, and eventually she fell asleep. It was nighttime. So she got tired. She got tired and she fell asleep on that spot. Now, Safwan ibn Mu'attal, radhiyallahu anhu, we talked about him briefly, that he was the Sahabi that would have deep sleep. He would sleep very deeply, and he was one of those charged with following the army, or following the caravan basically, or the army, and whatever would be left behind, he would pick it up and he would give it back to. So here the sharih of the hadith says, وَقَدْ كَانَ صَفْوَانُ بن مُعَطَّلْ رضي الله عنه يتفقد مخلفات الجيش. So he would look for whatever was left behind of the jaysh, of the army, بعد رحيله. So after they had left, حتى يوصلها إلى أصحابها. So he would get back whatever is left, load it on his camel, and he would bring it back and give it to the army, or give it to the owners of that, whatever they had left behind. So Safwan radhiallahu anhu comes and he sees a silhouette, or sees like a shadow in the middle of the desert, and he thinks, okay, he sees that this is a silhouette of a person. So as he comes closer, he realizes that this is our mother Aisha radhiallahu anha, and he says istirja', he says inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And again, I mentioned this last time, that this is something that we say when there's a musibah. I talked about the hadith Salama radhiallahu anha, that she says that my husband taught me this dua, that the Prophet ﷺ told us that whenever a musibah comes, you do istirja', you say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and Allahumma ajurni fi musibati wa akhlifni khayran minha. That, oh Allah, give me the ajr for this musibah and give me better than what I have lost. So this was something that was said when there was a musibah or a difficulty or a calamity has happened. And again, the reason why he had said that is that, finding our mother Aisha radhiallahu anha alone in the desert like this, left behind by the army, and he's like, what happened here? So he came, and it's mentioned that Aisha radhiallahu anha, she said he did not, I swear by Allah, he did not say one word except for istirja'. That's the only thing that I heard from him. And what he did, immediately he took the camel, he had it sit down, she sat down on the camel, and then he led the camel and going on. Now, that's where we left off last week, or last class. And next, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they basically have traveled all night and well into the day, and now it's the waqt al-zuhr. So it's like when the sun would come out and it becomes extremely hot, it's difficult to travel at that time. So they would stop to rest when they were journeying. So this is the time where they would rest. And Rasulullah and Sahaba are resting. They had just stopped to rest. It's the waqt al-dhahira, and Aisha radiallahu anha, she says, فَانْطَلَقَ يَقُودُ بِي الرَّاحِلَةِ. So Safwan radiallahu anhu was leading the camel, حَتَّى أَتَيْنَا الْجَيْشِ, until we had reached, or we caught up to the jaysh. And obviously, they're on one whole army traveling versus one camel traveling and one person on foot. They're obviously faster. So they, in that time that, and again, the Aisha radiallahu anha, in the hadith she mentions, he found me in the morning. So after Fajr prayer, he came and that's when he found me. And then they continue on. And then at Dhuhr time, when the army was resting, they had caught up to the army. So they had caught up to the army. So she says, حَتَّى أَتَيْنَا الْجَيْشِ بَعْدَمَا نَزَلُوا مُعَرِّسِينَ فِي نَحْرِ الظَّهِيرَةِ. So when the time of Zahira, the time of the hot sun, or the time of Dhuhr had come, they stopped and they were resting. That's when we caught up to the army. فَهَلَكَ مَنْ هَلَكَ. And she says that then they were destroyed, the ones who were destroyed. And what she's referring to is the ones who had initially spread the ifk, or made up the lie. And that's Abdullah ibn Salul, Abdullah ibn Ubay, being the leader of the Munafiqeen and his Munafiqeen. And then also there's 3 of the Sahaba, well-known Sahaba, pious Sahaba, who also got caught up, and we'll talk about that inshallah later. So فَهَلَكَ مَنْ هَلَكَ وَكَانَ الَّذِي تَوَلَّى الْإِفْكَ Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. So this is Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. He was the one who started that. So basically, I talked about how he was upset of the disgrace that he had just faced. Surah Munafiqun was revealed on that return journey. So as he, what he had said about the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba and the Az, the ones who are more honored, basically referring to himself, he said, we will take out, na'udhu billah, the Sahaba who are adhal, they're the disgraced ones. So he said this, and then the Zayd ibn Arqam, we talked about this, where he told the Prophet ﷺ, then Abdullah ibn Ubay swore that he did not say those words. And then while they're coming back, the Surah Munafiqun was revealed. So now his nifaq was open. He faced this disgrace that his nifaq was open for everyone to see. He was trying so hard to hide his nifaq, and that's what nifaq is, that you have 2 faces. You hide one side of yourself, and you show a smile, and you show something else to someone else on the outside. So he was trying to hide that, but now Quran itself was revealed to show his nifaq, to show his true face to everyone. Now, we talked about how he was always looking for times or opportunities to counter or harm the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. And we talked about, for example, can someone mention one of them? What happened in Uhud? The 300 men, barakallahu feek. So the morning of the battle, he returns back to Medina, 300. So 1/3 of the army, he leaves the battlefield. And that was again trying to deter the Muslims and trying to hurt their morale, and so that they would lose the battle. That was one of those things he tried. Also, many times where he would say things, for example, na'udhu billah, disrespectful things to the Prophet ﷺ. So I gave an example when the Prophet ﷺ was coming he was riding a donkey, and he had come into the gathering to give da'wah, and Abdullah ibn Ubay, right away he takes his scarf or his imama or whatever, he took it and he covers his nose, and he says, you've thrown dust on us, basically. And he's saying that, don't come to us with your da'wah. If anybody wants to come, they'll come themselves and listen to you. And then I talked about how one of the Abdullah ibn Ubay, he says that in that same conversation, he says, your donkey smells, it has a very disgusting smell. And one of the Sahaba retorts by saying that I swear by Allah, wallahi, the donkey of the Prophet ﷺ smells better than you. So he says this, and then there was almost a fight that broke out because of that. So anyways, so we know that Abdullah ibn Ubay, he's trying to find opportunities to harm the Prophet ﷺ as much as possible. And at this point, when they're sitting there and they're resting, and Aisha radiallahu anha comes mounted on a camel, led by Safwan ibn Mu'attal radiallahu anhu, فَقَامَ Abdullah ibn Ubay. So Abdullah ibn Ubay stood up. فَقَالَ لِلنَّاسِ. So he said to the people, إِمْرَأَةُ نَبِيِّكُمْ مَعَ رَجُلٍ غَيْرِ. That this is the wife of the Prophet, of your Prophet, and he is with a man other than the Prophet. وَاللَّهِ مَا سَلِمَتْ مِنْهُ وَلَا سَلِمَ مِنْهَا. Na'udhu billah, he says, that this is the wife of the Prophet ﷺ with another man. And he says, I swear by Allah that he was not saved from her and she was not saved from him. And that's where the ifk started. He accused our mother Aisha radhiallahu anha of a disgusting sin, and so that's where it started, the initiation. And they would, again, in their meetings or in their gatherings, they started spreading this, and then it got worse when they got back to Medina. Now, Aisha radhiallahu anha, she says that they got back to camp at that point, and that was the last stop before they entered into Medina. So she says, فَقَدِمْنَا الْمَدِينَةِ. So then we entered Medina, and then we talked about how Abdullah ibn Ubay, before remember his own son stopped him, and he put the sword. He said that you cannot enter until the Prophet ﷺ allows you to enter, and until you say that you are from the disgraced, and the Prophet ﷺ is from the he is from the honored ones. So we talked about that, and they enter into Medina, and Aisha radhiallahu anha says, فَاشْتَكَيْتُ بِهَا شَهْرًا. So I became sick. And this is something normal, especially when you're on a long journey. Excuse me. When you're on a long journey, you come back from Saudi Arabia, from Hajj or Umrah, or you come back from Pakistan, or you come back from another country, or you go back from your home country, and you usually get sick. For a few days, you're sick and stuff. Aisha radhiallahu anha was sick for a whole month. So she says that while I was sick, وَالنَّاسُ يُفِيضُونَ مِنْ قَوْلِ أَصْحَابِ الْإِفْكِ. So these people who were the people of Ifk, the ones who started the slander, the people were circulating and talking about this Ifk for a whole month while she's sick, and she doesn't even know. She didn't even know what's going on. She was sick in her bed, sick in her house, and she doesn't even know what's going on outside, what the people are saying and talking about on the outside. Now, I mentioned that Abdullah ibn Ubay is the leader of the hypocrites, and he's the one who started the Ifk, and he's the one who spread it the most. And from the Muslims that were caught up in this lie, where they heard it, and without, and we'll talk about that later on, the ayat that were revealed in defense of Aisha radhiallahu anha, and declaring her bara'ah and her innocence, that these even Sahaba, some of the pious Sahaba got caught up, and they started talking to each other and spreading it also. Okay, not knowing that this is ifk and not doing it but they just got caught up and they thought that it was something that actually happened, na'udhu billah, and they started to spread it also. And these are Hassan ibn Thabit, radhiallahu anh, the famous poet, Mistah ibn Uthatha, radhiallahu anhuma, wa Hamnatu bintu Jahsh, radhiallahu anha. This is Hamna is the sister of Zainab bint Jahsh, radhiallahu anha. Zainab bint Jahsh, radhiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she was, for a whole month, she was sick, and she was unaware of this humongous lie and ifk and slander that was being spread about her in Medina. Now she says that I felt a little, I didn't know anything of what's going on, except I felt a little bit indifference of the Prophet ﷺ. I felt a little difference of the change in the attitude of the Prophet ﷺ. So she says, وَيَرِيبُنِي فِي وَجَعِي أَنِّي لَا أَرَى مِنَ النَّبِي صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم اللطف الذي كنت أرى منه حين أمرض. So she says that lutf and that attitude of loving attitude that the Prophet ﷺ would show me, the only thing that got me suspicious of that something going on is that the Prophet ﷺ would not treat me the same way he was treating me in the past. إِنَّمَا يَدْخُلُ فَيُسَلِّمُ. So the Prophet ﷺ would come in and he would say salam to her. ثُمَّ يَقُولُ كَيْفَ تِيكُمْ. How are you doing? Basically, how are you doing? And so she would come in, and another meaning of this is like he's not even saying her name. He's just not even saying kayf halak. He's not even like talking to her directly. He's saying kayfa tikum, like how is she doing? How, like that, kind of saying like that. So he was changing his attitude. He had a change in attitude, and she noticed this, and she was sick. Remember, she was very sick, so she wasn't able to talk to him and ask him what's going on or anything like that. And she just basically put it to the side for now. And Aisha radhiallahu anha, again, why wouldn't she feel this indifference? Because of the love that the Prophet ﷺ would normally show her. So, for example, in one of the hadith, Amr ibn As radhiallahu anh, he felt as if he was the most beloved of all the Sahaba to the Prophet ﷺ. And this shows the lutf that the Prophet ﷺ would show to everyone. He would give time, and he would show his love to every one of the Sahaba. And Amr bin As, he says that one day I went to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says that I asked him that Man ayyun nas ahabbu ilayk, that which of the people are the most beloved to you? And the Prophet ﷺ says, Aisha anha. Openly says, my wife Aisha anha. Then Amr says, okay, well, that's from the women, okay, that's your wife, I understand. What about the men? And then the Prophet ﷺ says, Abuha. He says her father, Abu Bakr Siddiq. And he doesn't even say Abu Bakr, he says her father. So he's attaching it again to Aisha anha. Then he says, well, okay, well, who's next? And thumma man. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, thumma Umar ibn Khattab. Then he says, okay, then who's next? And he says, for example, Uthman, then Ali. So he kept on naming names. And the Amr bin As, he says that in one of the riwayat it comes that I kept on asking Thumma man, and the Prophet said some names, and then I gave up. So he said that I thought as if my name will come as one of the first, or because of the love the Prophet would show, attention the Prophet would give to him, and he wasn't one of those, the top. So he said I gave up asking after a couple of times. Now, another hadith, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, Aisha radhiallahu anha, she says, كنت أشرب من القدح وأنا حائض. Excuse me. So she says that while I was in the state of haid, while I was menstruating, I would drink from a cup, and the Prophet ﷺ, then I would give the cup to the Prophet ﷺ, would ask for the cup, she would give it to him, and فَيَدُ فَاهُ عَلَى مَوْضِعِ فِيهِ. So the Prophet ﷺ would look for the spot where she had drank from, and he would find that spot and he would drink from that same spot. Now, one of the hikmah behind this is that we know that the Yahud, the Jews, they had this thing where, and then the Mushrikeen would follow that also and do the same thing. In Medina, for example, is where the Yahud, they would consider the woman who is menstruating as something that's filthy and dirty. So they would have a separate, like a tent for her outside the house. She wasn't even allowed to live in the same house. So in that period, and they would be living outside, and they would basically throw food to them, not even give it to them in their hand, throw food to them like you're feeding an animal. Na'udhu billah. So they would do this, and this is when the hikmah behind this, the Prophet ﷺ is showing that the haid woman, the woman, menstruating woman, is not something that we disrespect or we treat like this. And the Prophet ﷺ would drink from that same spot. Also, Aisha radhiallahu anha, in the same hadith, she said, وَتَعَرَّقُوا مِنَ الْعِرْقِ. So I would take the bone with meat on it. So I take the piece of meat, and I would eat from the meat, and then the Prophet ﷺ would ask for it, so I would give it to the Prophet ﷺ, and he would find the same spot that I had eaten from, and he would eat from that same spot. So this is the love that he would show to her. And also many other examples. For example, where Aisha radhiallahu anha, there was a tribe that had come visiting the Prophet ﷺ, and they were doing like a war dance. It was like a preparation for war. They would use spears and swords, and they would do like a training kind of thing, kind of like a dance, but it was like a training thing. And the Prophet ﷺ asked her if she wanted to watch, and she was allowed to observe them practicing and preparing for war, where she was standing behind the Prophet ﷺ with her chin on his shoulder, and she remained in that position for a long time until she was satisfied, and she said, okay, that's enough. Now, another example is where Rasulullah ﷺ, and again, this is where the Prophet ﷺ would take his wives with him to his journeys. One of the journeys, he was coming back, and he says it was near Medina. So they were entering into Medina, and this is where there's a Dawoodiya building. It's by where Movenpick is and stuff. The hotel Movenpick is on that area. So it's basically to the north of Medina, in that area. And the Sahaba were coming back. The Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba to go forth, and when they were out of sight, he tells Aisha radhiallahu anha, he told her to remain behind. The other Sahaba, everyone left, and he says to her that let's race. So they actually raced, and Aisha radhiallahu anha says that I beat him. She says that I was light at that time and I beat him, and then years later they were same time, they were passing the same place. The Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba to move on, and when they went, then they raced again, and the Prophet ﷺ beat her the second time, and he says, "Hadihi bitilka." That basically, this is for that. I beat you. I got my revenge. Basically, I got you back for that time when you beat me. Another thing, and I'll end with this, is the Prophet ﷺ, he would use nicknames with Aisha radiallahu anha. So one of them, he would say Humayra, which is like a tasghir of Hamra. Hamra means red. Humayra is like a little reddish, you could say like a small. I'm sorry. Pinkish, you could say, yeah, something like that, pinkish, you could say. So he would say in one of the hadith, خُذُوا نِصْفَ دِينِكُمْ عَنْ هَذِهِ الْحُمَيْرَةِ. So the Prophet ﷺ says to the Nisa, he's talking to the Sahabiyat, he's saying, take half of your religion from this pinkish woman, you could say. There was a nickname again, Humayra. And another nickname he would use is Aish. So instead of Aisha, anha, he would say, Ya Aish. And this is another nickname he would say lovingly to her. So obviously she noticed the difference in the Prophet ﷺ when he would say Kayfa tikum, and he would not speak to her the way he was speaking. She was used to him speaking to her, and then we'll talk about inshallah next time, continuing on with how she found out about the ifk and what happened after that inshallah. We're not going to have class for the next 2 weeks. I'll be traveling inshallah, and then when we get back inshallah we'll continue with the hadith of ifk inshallah ta'ala. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.